also are in charge of the Campus Democratic Engagement Coalition. So if any of you guys are interested in any of the things that I just mentioned, feel free to chat with me or Melissa Baker-Pusamra, who is our director back there. We'd be happy to get you involved in all of the work we do. So with that in mind, we are hiring for the fall semester. We have 3 civic engagement associate positions open, as well as 2 positions as a democracy fellow. And so with the civic engagement associate, you would either be doing work like this, working with either our promotions and social media, or working with our student media organizations, or with our student service or like service and advocacy organizations here on campus. And then the democracy fellowships are through a nonprofit called Campus Vote Project, and you'd be doing work like voter registration drives or helping us with the CDEC. And a lot of that work is really going to focus on the huge election that's coming up in November. So yeah, like I said, please let us know if you're interested in any of that. So how many of you guys are here for Lib 100 or 201? Awesome. So we have our peer mentor right over here. She is here to help you through any questions that you have regarding your work for the class, or any questions you have about this series or this particular session. So be sure to connect with her if you need anything. So tonight our session is, as you can see, around the issue of immigration and how that affects people's view and the realities of their American dreams. This is part of a series that we're doing. Our series of Democracy 101 this semester is focused around the idea of deconstructing the American dream. And so we hope that if you guys enjoy tonight, it's like this, a lot more issues, barriers to the American dream, as well as hopeful ways that we can get past this, those barriers and obstacles. So we're really excited for this series, and we hope you guys will continue to join us for that. So before we get started tonight, we're going to do a little bit of an activity. You guys should have a poem on your table. It's by Langston Hughes, Let America Be America Again. Yes. So we are going to read this poem, and as we read the poem, I want you guys all to be thinking about the kind of the message that Langston Hughes is telling us in this poem, and start thinking about this idea of the American dream and how it is different for everyone, and how your concept of this, quote, American dream, or things along that line, might be different than the people sitting next to you or the people you're in class with or interact with on a daily basis. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to pass the mic off, and we're going to each read a stanza of the poem. If you don't want to read, obviously I'm not going to force you to, but I think it's a good way for us to kind of start thinking about this poem. Reading it out loud is a really good way. Like actually hearing yourself say it is a really good way to start thinking about that. So we do ask that you just use the mic, just because the session is being recorded tonight. So that helps with the audio for the recorded piece of it. But yeah, we'll just start it off over here.
Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain, seeking a home where he himself is free.
America was never America to me. Let America be the dream the dreamers dreamed. Let it be that great song. Let it be that great, strong land of love, where never kings connive nor tyrants scheme. Let any man be crushed by one above.
It was never America to me. Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe.
There's never been an there's never been equality for me, nor freedom in this homeland for the free. Say, who are you that mumbles in the dark, and who are you that draws your veil across the stars?
I am the poor white fooled and pushed apart. I am the Negro bearing slavery scars. I am the red man driven from the land. I am the immigrant clutching the hope I seek. I am and finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eat dog, of mighty crush the weak.
I am the young man, full of strength and hope, tangled in that ancient endless chain of profit, power, gain, of grab the land, of grab the gold, of grab the ways of satisfying need, of work the men, of take the pay, of owning everything for one's own greed.
I am the farmer, bondsman to the soil. I am the worker sold to the machine. I am the Negro, servant to you all. I am the people, humble, hungry, mean. Hungry, yet despite the dream, beaten, yet today, O pioneers, I am the man who never got ahead, the poorest worker bartered through the years.
Yet I'm the one who dreamt our basic dream in the old world while still a serf of kings, who dreamt a dream so strong, so brave, so true, that even yet its mighty daring sings in every brick and stone, in every furrow turned. That's made America the land it has become. Oh, I'm the man who sailed those early seas in search of what it meant to be my home. For I'm the one who left dark Ireland's shore, and Poland's plain, and England's grassy lea, and torn from black Africa's strand, I came to build a homeland of the free.
The free, who said the free? Not me. Surely not me. The millions on relief today, the millions shut down when we strike, the millions who have nothing for our pay, for all the dreams we've dreamed, and all the songs we've sung, and all the hopes we've held, and all the flags we've hung. The millions who have nothing for our pay, except the dream that's almost dead today.
Oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, and yet must be the land where every man is free. The land that's mine, the poor man's, Indians, Negroes, me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must bring back our mighty dream again.
Sure, call me any ugly name you choose. The steel of freedom does not stain. For those who live like leeches on the people's lives, we must take back our land again. America, oh yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be.
Out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death, the rape and rot of graft and stealth and lies, we the people must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains, and the endless plain, all the stretch of these great green states, and make America again.
The end.
All right, thank you guys. So as we read that poem, I hope you were all thinking about how this poem might relate to the topic we're going to hear about tonight, how it relates to your own life and your own concept of the American dream, and how it relates to other things that you, or other like knowledge that you may have come into this session already knowing about the American dream. So with those things in mind, we're going to take probably just about 5 minutes for you guys to chat with the folks at your tables and just think about those things, what you already know about the American dream, what kinds of things did you see in the poem that stuck out to you that might relate to this topic, and then in regards to this topic, What kinds of questions do you have that you'd like to see answered? And we'll have a portion at the end of our session tonight about, or as a Q&A with our panelists and with our presenter. So if those questions don't get answered in the next hour and a half, then you can ask those questions then. But yeah, take about 5 minutes to just chat with the people around you about all of those things. right, go ahead and wrap up your conversations at your tables. And now, as we come back to our large group, before I hand it over to our presenter tonight, I was just asked, like, what kinds of things did you guys talk about? If anybody would want to share something that stuck out to them from the poem, or how they could relate to the poem or to this topic, or anything like that.
So over here, we kind of just like talked about like the first time or the most impactful time we've heard like American Dream mentioned, and like how maybe like that idea has changed, or how like really impactful it was the first time.
Did anyone have any like stories of that time that they wanted to share?
So I like described like the first time I learned about it in history class. I was like in high school, and my professor, my teacher in U.S. history, we just finished up learning about the civil rights movement, and then he moved straight into the American Dream. We talked about it as this like very idealistic thing, and I kind of like talked about how like that was the first time I like learned about it. Like, you know, you hear the phrase, don't really, like, you can assume what it means, but like now coming to college and just like interacting with different groups, I've kind of learned like it's more of a system of oppression than anything else, in my personal opinion. And I just kind of think back of how like it was very like idealized back when I was like learning about it in high school.
All right, does anybody else want to share anything? We'll maybe have one more person share.
Well, we had kind of talked about how the American dream seems really easy from people who think they've achieved it based on the exploitation of someone else's labor. And sometimes it's easy for people at the top to make excuses for people who are at the bottom because they say just work harder and you'll achieve the American dream. But that's not really how it works systematically.
All right, thank you guys for going through that exercise with me. And, I hope that you guys just start thinking about this concept and this topic. And with that, I will hand it over to our presenter for the night. Scott Stabler is a professor from the history department here at Grand Valley, and he's going to walk us through kind of the history of immigrants and the American dream, and then we'll head into a little panel discussion.
Can y'all hear me? How you doing? Good. I think the first problem with this question is, what is an American? What defines you as an American? Like when you picture this person's an American, what do you picture in your head? It's really just a passport holder, right? And if you talk about the technical language, then what's the dream of the American? Success. What's success look like? Okay, upward mobility. What does that mean? Money? I mean, that's why a lot of y'all are in college, right? It's the quickest way to the middle class statistically, as far as money. Or debt, that's true. I heard you. I hear you. I just paid off my student loans. This is just a video. I'm going to go back and forth between the PowerPoint and this stuff, so I hope I got it right. Melissa, I may have to, there's two open, I think. That's the problem. There it is. Maybe y'all seen this before, but it's pretty funny.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no. Where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, well, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Hamshashina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Hello, Governor! What's all this then? Dropping the morning to you. Let's go sporty. Double, toil and trouble. Mind the gap, beware Jack the Ripper. Bloody hell! Pip, pip, cheerio! I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
So when you think about what's an American, people you see that, people probably ask you that sometimes. Where are you from? And I just think that's funny because obviously he's less American, if that's what defines American, how long you've been, your family's been here, and he's less so than she is. So that's the idea is you want to think about throughout this. I mean, I'm going to cover the history, and I'll show you what I'm going to cover, but think about what an American is, because we other people, right? Make them the other. It's very common. I teach teachers, and they use the term we. When they talk about we came over on the Mayflower, or we, today, I mean, I'm not even lying. Today the kid was teaching about Japanese internment camps, and we interned the Japanese. Well, of course, the people they interned were American as well, but of Japanese descent. This othering, which I'm sure you felt at some point in your life, a lot of you, some of you haven't, but you've seen it. This othering is what's happening there with the Koreans and the white guy. So here are my objectives. I don't read PowerPoints to you. You can read them yourself. Doesn't that bore you? So this is me. I taught a semester in Germany with my wife and kid and the mayor of the local town and a stabler. The guy on the left there is some ancestor from 1814 when my family came over from Germany. It was a Baptist fleeing religious persecution from this town right outside of Stuttgart where they were cabbage farmers. So it's pretty fascinating. I went to the church where they're all married. They all died and had their funerals as well as their weddings in the same church. And in Germany, you're only allowed to be buried for like 20 years. And they dig you up and get rid of you because, well, they'd overfill the land because they've been burying people for forever. But that's what the kind of story. And until my dad, really, nobody in the Stabler clan had left this Williamsport, Pennsylvania since 1814. They were still farming out all around that central Pennsylvania area. So it's personal. Immigration is personal for all of us. So here it kind of shows you the percentage. This is a percentage of Americans, the percentage of Americans not born in the United States. So the percentage of Americans that are immigrant, and it includes illegal as well as legal immigration. So we're below we being the United States. I just did it myself, although that's true. Some of the current time, that is we. The United States is below where it's been previously. So the point basically is that this percentage of the population that's immigrant is pretty normal. We had a huge dip in the 70s, and then it's recapped now. This just shows you, again, statistics of foreign born, percentage of foreign born. Pretty consistent with the dip in the middle of the 20th century. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this, how historians work, and talk about immigration, because really History is how we remember it. What do we remember about immigration? And kind of what drives immigration? Then a brief history of immigration. Then historical memory. How we remember immigration, its impact is huge, right? People that have died, like the interpretation of Abraham Lincoln or Robert E. Lee, those two dudes haven't changed in 150 years, but our interpretation of them has changed. The same has happened with immigration, right? Immigration being a positive American good, Statue of Liberty, to immigration overflowing and taking over all our jobs. Those are not new thoughts. This kind of tells you how historians work. I'm not going to bore you and read all that. But historians basically working about taking what they know and interpreting it. There is no such thing as a fact in history except for certain dates. John F. Kennedy was killed on a certain date, but who killed him? It's open to interpretation. And then history, of course, just kind of repeats itself. On immigration, I would say immigration is just another cycle of history. It cycles through, people freak out, we go back, and here we go again. And the interpretation can change, and this is a textbook from California who included a poem from or an excerpt from a Dominican American family. This is a California textbook. You go to the Texas textbook, published by the same company, McGraw-Hill, and guess what you have? You have them talking, they interview a Border Patrol agent. So California kids are going to get one thing, Texas kids are going to get another thing. And then why are those two important? Because they adopt textbooks for the entire state. So there's a board. I taught high school in Texas, so I know a little bit more about this. But the board of the Capitol adopts two textbooks, and every district in the entire state has to choose one of those two textbooks. And the textbooks really that's a lot of textbooks, right? California and Texas are the two most populous states in the country. So you think about how many textbooks they're going to get to sell, how much money they're going to make. They gear them politically to the population. And California tending to be more liberal, has the Dominican poem, and Texas tending to be more conservative, has the Border Patrol agent story. So what you hear and what you learn throughout history is interpreted. And how you do, you're ingrained with these micro beliefs. But I follow the kind of philosophy of economic determinism drives history, meaning money. Money drives history. If you follow money, it'll explain history to you most of the time, right? Any questions so far? If you got questions, feel free to ask. But everybody's an immigrant, right? I believe in the Lucy in Africa as the formation of, we're all black originally, right? So everything comes out of Africa. And the Beringa theory, meaning across the Bering Strait, it's debatable, is how people got to the Americas. That's the first wave of immigration, though, right? Now, then, of course, you have the Europeans coming over after the American Indians have gotten here. The Mayflower Compact is this belief that that's where democracy is created, is on the Mayflower, right on the ship. They're all immigrating. Why are they immigrating? Religious persecution. That's what you've been told your whole life, right? Of course, they were in the Netherlands at that time, so they weren't really being persecuted by the Dutch. They weren't even in the English. But they came over the Mayflower Compact, and they were supposed to go to the original colonies in Virginia, because that's where the money was in tobacco. But the Pilgrims were only about 30% of the ship. About 30% of the people on the Mayflower were Puritans / Pilgrims. The other 70% were just regular laborers that wanted to be tobacco farmers. And when they found out that the Mayflower was off course, they threatened to riot. And so the Pilgrims, to save themselves, created the Mayflower Compact, which everybody says is where majority rule comes from. Well, yes, they agreed to majority rule, but the only reason majority rule is to save their necks, because these guys were going to kill them. Because Jamestown was the original colonies of the United States. I mean, that's where they first came in. Originally, it's an all-male colony. I mean, homosexuality for Europeans has been here before heterosexuality, I hate to tell you, because it was all males. They lived together. I guarantee you, for I think it was 12 years. Well, you know, I don't have to explain more. But in Jamestown becomes this thing called Bacon's Rebellion. There's immigrants are coming over, right? First it's men, then it's men and women. Then they need labor because tobacco is such a powerful force. It's like oil or technology today. It's a huge economic boom. And so the king is paying people in Virginia to bring over indentured servants, and these indentured servants are getting land, right? They work for 4 years, they get this land, and then they get to be farmed, and then they bring over you see the cycle goes on and on, right? And they're white. mostly. There are a few Africans, but 1619 is the first African Americans arrival. This is 1676, so about 50 years later. So there's not a lot of African Americans there are slaves. Some of the African Americans are actually free. It's a long, complex story I'm not going to get into. But Bacon's Rebellion is when these indentured servants, eventually they run out of land to give the indentured servants. So it's like me saying to you, you work 4 years, get your college degree, and the day you're supposed to get your college degree, they say, sorry, we don't have any degrees for you. So these guys have worked the land for 4 years, and the rich guys are saying, we don't have any land for you, so of course they rebel, right? So these white indentured servants revolt. Part of the reason they revolt, they kill Indians too, because Indians are trading a lot with the rich white guys. And the rebellion's fairly successful. It burns Jamestown to the ground. The first time British actually sent troops to the Americas. But the result of this is the largest migration in American history, which is forced migration, right? Slavery. So the white rich guys realize they can't hire white indentured servants because this is going to happen to them again. So this is this economic idea of slavery comes out of this rebellion, which is, of course, a huge migration. And I say migration is about money. Well, yes, of course, slavery is about money. It's very valuable. The 1860, the start of the Civil War, the value of African slaves in America is worth the dollar for dollar the stock market in 1960. So it's just massive amounts of money. Cotton is the #1 export in the United States in 1860, and it makes over half of all exports. So thinking about that. Of course, immigrants have always been in America. They've always been part of Washington's army. Von Steuben trained the Washington's army at Valley Forge. The Marquis de Lafayette Square right across from the White House, is key in getting French support, which the United States wouldn't have won. Over 3,000 Irishmen, native Irishmen, serve in the American Army. Casimir Pulaski, if you know Pulaski Days and Grand Rapids Party, is an immigrant. So immigrants have always played a role in American history. White, brown, black, red, whatever you want to call it. So Washington knew. And Lafayette is quite, actually, Lafayette offers the money to Jefferson to free his slaves, and he refuses. So they start, the fear of immigrants starts right away too, 1798, right? The Revolution, 1782, and the Constitution, 1787. So less than 10 years later, there's already the Alien and Sedition Acts, which requires people that are not English to wait longer to become citizens. It's a way of keeping the white Protestant male power, because a lot more French and Irish are starting to immigrate to the United States, and it scares them. It scares the white power, right? People don't want to give up power. Think about that. Because they don't want to give up power. Why? Because power drives their economic value. And economics, money, drives history a lot of times. Are you with me? Money. So this is how I write this formula out. Larry, you remember this? The I's. Infrastructure, inventions, and immigration. When you get, how you make money back then is if you're middle class to lower middle class like a lot of us are, the American dream back then was to own your own farm. So you'd come out to some place like Allendale, you'd immigrate out here, you'd have to get your goods back to the big cities. So that's where infrastructure, that first I is key. Infrastructure drives it, so I can have my apple crop here in Allendale, but I can sell it in New York City because I can transport it fast, right? And why they can transport as fast as stuff like inventions, like trains, refrigeration, oh, that's later, steamboats. And then when it gets back to the city, who's going to produce that cotton, or who's going to produce that apple juice, are immigrants. Because people that are native white born want their own farms, so they've already moved out west, and immigrants take the spots in the factories. And the Americans have needed, the first industrial revolution, this is what it leads us, the big I's, industrialization, need immigrant work. I mean, throughout history, the United States has need immigrants, and I'll show you another example. I don't know if you've seen this movie, but it's pretty good.
California has another crisis.
This is a real serious disaster.
And this one may have a greater impact than anything that has ever happened before.
Its severity cannot be underestimated.
We have lost our pride.
It is a state of emergency.
We have lost our dignity.
It's the beginning of the apocalypse.
We have lost our Mexicans.
A day without a Mexico.
I woke up and my husband was gone. And my husband, he is a Mexican, and he would never leave without his teeth.
Every explanation needs to be considered.
Forget about parking your cars at valet. Forget about getting a glass of water at the restaurant.
Then I came here. The place was a mess. I had to wash a dish.
Why is the
government calling them aliens if they did not think that they were from somewhere else. Jose, mothership.
If we don't find them, we'll be in deep you-know-what.
Of a car was this angry customer?
And life as we know it will never be the same.
There's 13 million people missing, and you could be next.
How do you make the invisible visible?
Please come back. Por favor.
A day without a Mexican.
The other scene is very funny. It's called a mockumentary, mocking Americans that say Mexicans should go back to Mexico. And of course, that would create all kinds of problems for the rich. And so out of this industrialization where all these immigrants are coming in to fill jobs comes these R's: religion, okay, recreation, and reform. Some of the big reform movements of first industrialization is abolition. Because women, largely rich white women, now have the industrialized husband. So they're not having to work on the farms or produce children to those farms. So women are deciding that what are they going to do with their Christian action? And so women, out of the industrial revolutions, there's two ways of it, become the key pushers of reform and religion. They use their Christian faith to do more. Abolition being the most successful reform movement in American history, right? But they also are in for temperance, meaning no alcohol. Why? Because when these immigrants start showing up, they're largely Irish and German, and they also practice the religion of, anybody know? What? Catholicism. And so when they show up at the Industrial Revolution, John Stewart has something to say about it.
It's not a traditional America anymore. Traditional America as we knew it is gone. Ward, June,
let's
Wally, and the Beeve, out of here.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yes. Yes, Bill. Obama's re-election marked the moment that traditional America ended. The moment when the family from the 1950s sitcom Leave It to Beaver ceased to be real. Yes, it was a moment when traditional America. Obama's re-election was a moment when traditional America realized that even their witch wives couldn't save them from being replaced. Bill O'Reilly, what are you talking about?
The demographics are changing. The white establishment is now the minority.
Yes, as America's demographics have always been changing, and the old establishment always giving way to, and resenting, a new establishment, Mr. O'Reilly and Mr. Goldberg. Or perhaps Mr. O'Reilly.
What do you know? Why is he putting emphasis on their last names? Very good. O'Reilly, she said O'Reilly is Irish, obviously, and Goldberg is Jewish.
O'Reilly is forgetting the, hold on, 19th century. When people with names like O'Reilly were described in the Christian Examiner newspaper with phrases like, quote, the ill-clad and destitute Irishman is repulsive to our habits and our tastes. And by the way, the Christian Examiner newspaper at that time considered to be one of the more progressive newspapers by acknowledging the Irish to be human. Here's Harper's Weekly on the 19th century threat to traditional white America. We have given them land, employment at far better wages than they could have obtained at home, and political rights. They have come to us steeped in ignorance and superstition. Nearly 75% of our criminals and paupers are Irish. See, Bill? I mean, you guys turned most of that around. Now, as your friend Bernie Goldberg, Bill, I did search microfiche, Library of Congress, and could not find any instances at any point in American history when traditional Americans didn't like Jews. There was nothing there. I tried. Turns out, apparently, Jews have always been in America and always been loved and accepted.
Of course, that was sarcasm. Anti-Semitism has ruled America for most of its history. So, there are definitely times when who is an American is questionable, right? That's kind of the point. And these reformers are trying to do good, and they're also thinking Catholics, they're very anti-Catholic as well. So this is the immigration waves from the potato famine and the revolutions of the 1840s when the Germans and the Irish came here. I mean, there are more Irish in America than there are in Ireland today. Think about that. So the Latinos of today that are sometimes vilified, this is the ones that, well, never mind, I'm not going to go there. They're vilified. These are the villains, the othering of immigrants in America in the 19th century. And they're definitely not considered white. Correct? I mean, John F. Kennedy is our only Catholic president, and Joe Biden, believe it or not, is our only Catholic vice president. So there's still that stigma to some extent. Now, fascinating as it is, until Gorsuch and Kavanaugh were appointed by Trump, there wasn't a single Protestant on the Supreme Court. Protestant meaning the opposite of the other segment of Christianity is Protestant or Catholic. So that's kind of weird. They're either Jewish or they're Catholic. Everyone, all 9 of them. So you see the influx of where they're coming from. Mexico, 13,000, right? Almost nobody. And of course, as I showed you, they need Irish labor. They need that Irish labor, but yet they still vilify the Irish. The Civil War is the same way. I mean, think about this. This is a come serve in German to the German soldiers. 20% of Union soldiers in the Civil War were immigrants. 18% more, so 38% total, 18% more had a parent who was an immigrant. So that's 38% of the Union Army, which defeats the Confederacy, right? Add on top of that 38%, 10 more percent's black. 48% of the Union Army is either immigrant or African American. And I forgot to say this, but Washington's troops at Yorktown, where he defeats Cornwallis, is 15% African American as well. The most integrated army in American history until Korea is Washington's. You seem to forget that. So then you have another wave, post-Civil War wave of immigration. This is when Emma Lazarus writes the poem. This is when the Statue of Liberty is donated by the French. I'm not going to read all this to you, but they're arresting the Statue of Liberty. And then we have another wave of immigration in the Second Industrial Revolution. Ellis Island becomes big. And until, well, I'll get to Ellis Island. But cities, look at cities. This is cities in 1880. Anything city that's over 100,000. So you can kind of see the population. And then that second wave of, I'm going the wrong way, sorry. The second wave of immigration is getting ready to come. The reform movements are different, mostly around prohibition, but prison reform. Let's see, what is the other reform? This idea of social gospel, the whole idea of social gospel. The Salvation Army comes about at this time. And it's, again, largely driven by wealthier white women. Jane Hull, if you're a social worker, Hull House is created at this time. Jane Addams, excuse me, who was also gay. We don't want to talk about that, though, right? So 1880 is the city, that's the cities in 1880 with over 100,000 people. So 40 years later, you can see how many cities have over 100,000 people. And the boom in the population. Mostly immigrants from, the second wave of immigration is mostly from Italy and Eastern Europe and Greece. Again, mostly Catholic. And they start off at Ellis Island off of right next to the Statue of Liberty, if you've been there. 40% of all Americans can trace their lineage back to Ellis Island. Before this, like when my family came over, there was no such thing as illegal immigration. This idea of illegal immigration is fascinating. Only 1% of those that arrived at Ellis Island were actually rejected because people knew they needed immigration. They needed labor. And then this is the Salvation Army, it's the original Salvation Army. Of course, this is the time when you get into now they're starting to get scared again. When you get into these acts, the government kind of gets into pushing the idea of excluding minorities. This is at the end of the 19th century when the bell curve comes around that people aren't as smart based on their race. So they exclude the first people they exclude the Chinese Exclusion Act. But then it becomes a bigger and bigger push to exclusion in the early 20th century. Emergency Quota Act is basically the immigrants, this is the first Red Scare. I think the fascinating thing is the Chinese Exclusion Act and this first Red Scare, we're seeing some of that little bit of othering with coronavirus, right? You're a little bit scared differently based on who you might be talking to about the virus. The National Origins Act basically so that people can control what country they come from. If there's more people here already, you can bring more in. You can't bring in you can only bring in a certain percentage. World War II leads to an economic explosion and lack of need for any kind of labor. So that's that big dip you saw was largely for the lack of need for labor. But the 1960s, they finally realized they need labor again, and this is when it opens it up to, not based on what country you come from, to open up immigration more in 68. So you had that dip, and then it started to come back, and now you're starting to see Latino immigration largely starting in 68. And then in 1986, Ronald Reagan offers amnesty, and I-9, if you've employed anywhere, that was the compromise, right? Reagan agreed to give amnesty to all illegal immigrants. They could register if they would institute an I-9 form, which is the form all of you fill out when you're employed, an Immigration 9, to make sure you're an American citizen. And that is the purpose of it. Today, the current migration, I would argue, is largely relevant to what if you look at where the United States has intervened, places like El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Colombia, and that's where the countries are largely in flux, for lack of a better term, and that is where a lot of these people are coming, because there's a difference between an illegal immigrant and a person seeking asylum, right? And from my understanding, a lot of people that are coming to the United States now are seeking asylum from violence, as the Jews sought asylum after World War II, as people from Africa, the Congo, the Sudan, sought asylum from violence. And so that is what the question is these people now that are coming from Latin America are largely seeking asylum. And I just want to bring this up. The military still today has a heavy immigrant population. Of course, it has an overwhelming minorities overrepresented in the military as well. So the military has always been a democratizing institution. But 3% of American soldiers today are not even U.S. citizens. Think about that. So I want to play one more video, and then I'm going to let the panel share all their massive knowledge.
One morning in August 2010, federal agents stormed the home of Clara and Josefina, two sisters raising their 3 small children together. The agents handcuffed Clara in front of the kids, then loaded them into separate vehicles. When Josefina got home from work later that morning, she was arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, at her door.
Le preguntó al agente de inmigración a dónde le iban a llevar a los niños. Sí, yo les pregunté qué iban a hacer con ellos y me dijeron que los iban a llevar a donde llevan todos los niños.
Hey, does she have a coat and shoes? Does she have a coat and shoes, Dad?
While in custody, the 2 moms found out that they'd been the victims of a botched drug bust. The federal agents found no drugs, and CPS found no evidence of maltreatment. But because the sisters are undocumented immigrants, ICE kept them in detention for 4 months. For those 4 months, the mothers had no contact with their children, 2 of whom are U.S. citizens. Then, without notice, ICE dropped the 2 mothers at the U.S.-Mexico border. They had little idea where their children were, except that they had been put into foster care with strangers. Under the Obama administration, a record-breaking 400,000 people were deported last year. These families have seen firsthand how immigration enforcement can tear children from their parents. Because they're locked up, the foster care process moves forward without them. It effectively puts borders on parenthood itself. The Applied Research Center's groundbreaking new report, Shattered Families, is the first national study to explore how children whose parents are detained and deported are placed in foster care. Over the last year, ARC surveyed foster care agencies and child welfare lawyers in communities across the U.S. and interviewed hundreds of caseworkers, policymakers, judges, attorneys, and foreign consulates, as well as mothers and fathers who are held in detention centers and who've been deported. ARC estimates that well over 5,000 children currently in foster care are threatened with extended or permanent separation when their parents are detained or deported. If immigration and child welfare policy doesn't change, another 15,000 may follow in the next 5 years. As one child welfare attorney told us, once parents are deported, they're treated like they fall off the face of the earth. This is a growing problem because the federal government now requires most local law enforcement to check immigration status. A routine traffic stop can lead to unimaginable consequences. Mothers that ARC spoke to in detention told us about calling the police on an abusive partner, only to find themselves having their own status checked. Once detained, most parents were completely excluded from decisions about the well-being of their children. One parental rights advocate told us about a mother that couldn't be found for 7 months because ICE had transferred her from New York to Pennsylvania to Arizona without informing anyone. ARC also found that many CPS systems and child protective courts are biased against reuniting children with their own parents in another country or with an undocumented family member in the U.S., so the children stay in foster care. This goes against clear research that children are better off with their own families, and it also violates CPS's federal mandate to reunite families. And Clara and Josefina, after more than a year without seeing their 3 kids, their family was reunited in Mexico.
Porque me duele mucho hablar de esto, por eso yo no quería muy bien hablar de esto, porque me duele mucho y no quiero recordar nada de eso, lo que quiero es olvidarme de todo eso.
But everything isn't back to normal. Josefina's son was only 9 months when ICE kicked down the door. He's now almost 2 years old. He spent more of his life in foster care than with his own mother. In some ways, they are among the lucky ones. Over 5,000 children with detained or deported parents are currently in the foster care system. Many will never see their birth mother or father again. And unless something is done, thousands more will follow.
So that's kind of the history of it. As you can see, that's during the Obama administration, so it's not the Trump administration, which has probably exponentially grown that same issue. So I guess my basic point is that history repeats itself, that the fear of the other is a common theme, and that other can be an immigrant. And some people see that as a threat to their economic well-being for some reason. And thus that is the division in America today over the policy of immigration. Thank you very much. I know the panel's going to get up here, but if you have any specific questions about the history, I'll be glad to take it quickly so that they can, I don't want to cut into their time. Any specific policy question? Awesome. All right.
Thank you, Scott. Now we'll invite our 2 panelists up to answer some questions. Any more questions? And Scott, if you want to, you can absolutely feel free to join this discussion as well. All right. I'm going to first let our panelists introduce themselves, kind of explain briefly your experiences with immigration or the process, and kind of what brings you to this panel today.
Hi, so my name's Alex. So what brings me here today? So back before I was born, not too long before I was born, there's this program, it's called the Visa Lottery, where permanent resident visas and green card status is offered to certain countries where the U.S. is seeing declining numbers of immigration. And then, so my parents and a lot of people in my family just sat down one Sunday after church, filled out the application newspaper, and they were chosen. And I remember for this, my parents told me it was my mom, all her 4 siblings that applied, and their entire families. And their families were adult children, so they had to have their own application. And my parents were selected. My parents were 42 and 46 at the time, and they also tried forever to have kids. So when they found out they got chosen, they had to go through a lot of, they had to go to the consulate, and my parents are from Romania. They had to go to the consulate, fill out a bunch of paperwork, pass health checks, and then in the middle of this, my mom found out she was pregnant. So my parents came over it was actually July 14th, 1999, and that's actually my dad's birthday, and then I was born 2 months later in September 18th. So I have a lot of experience, and I just have a lot of personal experience, and I've kind of grown up mostly in my Romanian culture, so that's what brings me here today.
My name is Adam Lipscomb. I'm a pastor in Grand Rapids, and I first connected with the issue of immigration around around 2005. There were some missionary friends who were going to be going to Bosnia, but Grand Rapids at that time had a large Bosnian population that was eligible for citizenship. And so to connect with that group, they put together this citizenship tutoring class to help prepare people for the citizenship test. And they said, you should do this at your church. And so we started offering these classes, and mostly we did them because they were just a lot of fun. We'd teach citizenship, and then on the 6th week, we would have just a big meal, and everyone would bring dishes from their home country, and it was like payday for the tutors. We would just eat everyone's food, and it was a lot of fun. But then in 2006, there was a fairly large immigration march, a demonstration in Grand Rapids, and I ended up, and it was in my neighborhood, and ended up being kind of swept up in the march that was happening. And that moment was a deeply impacting moment, just as I talked with the people in the crowd about why they were protesting, some of their hopes and dreams around what immigration could look like in the United States. And so since then, I've become a fairly active immigration reform advocate, and our church started a legal office that offers low-income legal aid to immigrants and refugees. So it's called Immigrant Connection, and in our denomination there are several. It's a growing thing in our church, and it's quickly becoming one of the largest faith-based low-income immigrant legal services providers in the United States. So that's how I got involved.
Scott, I know we already kind of touched on your your kind of place in all of this, but if you want to either add on to that or remind us all of your position in this whole conversation.
Oh. Well, my position is a history professor, so I've studied a lot about the history of the United States. But I'm not an immigrant. When I first I taught high school in the inner city of Houston, and that was my first realization of what immigration versus asylum was, and refugees versus immigrants. And so many of my students were immigrants that it was just a fascinating experience for me. So I guess for me, it's about experiencing having grown up in a privileged culture to then kind of seeing an underprivileged culture and what they had gone through just to live in the United States was amazing to me.
And so, yeah, Scott and Adam, you both kind of talked about these moments in your life where that have kind of shaped your idea about immigration, and like how those experiences have helped you become like, or helped you get to where you are today. Alex, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more on maybe like stories or experiences you had growing up as the child of immigrants, and how that has kind of shaped your identity today.
So when my parents came over, they came over just 2 months before I was born, which is a lot. And they were also like older and really starting from nothing. My mom's brother was here, came here a few years prior. His children were all in high school. So thankfully when my parents jumped through all these hoops, got all the paperwork in line, they had somewhere to come to. So when they initially got here, they lived with my uncle. And so they only lived there for 4 months. As soon as they got here, my uncle helped get both of my parents employed. And my father started, he got here in July. He started working at the end of July, so just like a few weeks after he got here. And when they left, they had the understanding that like they would be starting from scratch. It wasn't familiar for them. They didn't have like too many transferable skills. My dad worked a skilled trade there, and it wasn't transferable. He wasn't fluent he didn't speak English at all, actually. Neither of my parents did. So they got a nice start with my uncle, and then when I was about 1.5, my mom's parents came here, watched me for a while, and then after the end of their trip, they took me back to Romania with them till I was 3. This was really hard for my parents, but they knew it was what was best, so they could continue establishing themselves. And when I would come back to them, and they visited me, and of course I was in the best hands ever. I love my grandparents. They had moved out of my uncle's house, bought in their own house. In the first year when they were here, they hopped a bunch of jobs because a lot of the places they started working, like the factory my dad first worked at, closed. So they didn't have too much stability. But when I was 3 and I was living with my parents again, they were pretty stable. But like throughout my childhood, they always worked overtime. So I was in like daycare a lot, and just like being like the daughter of immigrants, neither of my parents were fluent. When I like joined the school system, they weren't ready for me. I was really shy. Even in daycare, I didn't speak English until I was 5. And I spoke with a very thick Eastern European accent until I was 8. So no one in kindergarten wanted to play with me. No teacher really had the patience for me. So like I was really shy. And then when we moved, we went to a new school district. They had English as a second language programs that were more developed. So I got one-on-one time with an instructor. She would come to my house, give me stickers when I did well. But a lot of like my early childhood kind of shaped my personality, because I think because of all of that, like people didn't want to like pay attention to me really. I like really withdrew and became really shy. But like every time I'd come home, it like was always me and my parents. So I really thrive with them, and I miss them a lot. And then just in general, so when my parents left Romania, it was like they had just come out of like really bad leadership. It was a dictatorship. There was a recent like revolt that they like lived through, but the economy was like stabilizing. Right now, and like through my childhood, it's taken a huge downturn. So just immigration more in general, not necessarily to the U.S. From a culture where we're all really close, it's kind of torn us apart because everyone left to go to countries like Germany and other countries for better job opportunities. Like, for example, now a doctor in Romania makes less than a makeup artist just because of, like, that's where the values are, more on, like, vanity than education right now. So, like, and when you work somewhere else, you're only really going to vacation back home. So it's really kind of torn my family apart. On my mom's side, there's 7 cousins, and we live between 4 countries. And then my 3 cousins who are in the U.S., we live between 3 states. So it's really kind of like spread my family apart in general, but all the time, like, I get a chance to, like, see my family. It makes it all the more worth it. And then growing up, my mom, so I don't really remember her reasoning, but when I was, like, in elementary school, she applied for citizenship. I remember she got a CD to listen to all the questions. So every time, like, she'd be driving home from work, she'd play that CD, so I have a bunch of very monotone United States facts on a CD if anyone's interested. So she took that initiative, and comparing my parents, she is more, she took the initiative to, like, learn a little more, like, of the language and, like, learn, like, how to function in the culture. My dad, I'll get to this part later, but sorry. My dad, he never really got used to it just because he was stuck. So, like, in Romania, where my parents are from, they live in villages where their family's been there for generations and generations, and everyone knows each other. So for him, leaving and just sitting on the porch and not knowing your neighbors is such a strange idea. So he suffered with, like, a lot of depression when I was growing up because of that. And then he never applied for citizenship just because he went to English as a second language courses. He did them 4 separate times and never got the hang of it. And he, right now, I'm trying to convince him to study for the exam just because it does bring a different level of security. Of course, no one's going to threaten to take his green card away, but, like, definitely no one's going to take your citizenship away. And we've kind of waited this long because there's this rule that if you've been in the United States for 20 years and you're over the age of 60, the format of the exam looks different. So we thought by waiting it'd be easier on him. So right now he's studying for the exam, and he's hating every bit of it. But so that's where we are now. And then just noticing, like, little things growing up with my parents. My parents still have a really thick accent, so a lot of people aren't patient with them, which really frustrates me, and they take advantage of them. Like, I'm pretty sure my home phone back home gets the most scam calls in the neighborhood, just because, like, I assume they hear my mom's voice, thick accent, it's easier to take advantage of, and we hear a lot of, like, similar stories from our community. And then just recently I've been thinking also about, like, both of my parents. Again, they both knew skilled trades when they were back in Romania, and just because of the language barrier, they haven't been able to advance in their careers, which is really tough for them because, you know, you always want to make it to the next step, but they're stuck. They've been stuck for a while. My dad's been working one job for the past 15 years, and, like, the company he works for, most of the employees are very transient. It's a very low-level job. They aren't there for more than 6 months, and my dad knows a whole heck of a lot more than he's able to communicate, so he's been stuck in his position for a while, just because of the language barrier essentially. And then one more short story before I turn the mic over back to Jane. But like I mentioned, like people are a lot less patient with me and my family. And I've always kind of been like a translator for my parents. And since it's the three of us, we've been really close. So actually, I've been feeling homesick lately, so they visited me last weekend. And we were at a hotel in Holland. And I remember this, and this isn't a one-off incident. Me and my parents are just exchanging a conversation in the elevator. And this man starts speaking Spanish to us. So the native tongue of Romania is Romanian. It is from the same root as like Italian, Spanish, and I believe French. But he starts saying, "Buenos dias, ¿cómo estás?" And I kind of looked at him and I was like, "Oh no, like we're actually Romanian. What made you think like we were from a Spanish-speaking country, or that we were speaking Spanish?" And he's like, "Oh no, don't take it like that." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And he's like, "Romania, where's that?" And I was like, "Oh, Eastern Europe." He said, "Well, I thought you made that up." And then right before he got off the elevator, he said, "Welcome to America," as if me and my family haven't been here for 20 years. And it's just more comfortable for us to speak Romanian.
Thank you, Alex, for sharing all of that with us. So, Adam, Scott shared this like historical overview. I was wondering if you could help us understand some of the like contemporary issues that you are working with today, and how your work has kind of impacted those issues.
So on the advocacy side, so I've been involved in advocacy since 2006. One of the things that has changed radically over the course of the last several years is just how polarizing immigration has become. So so people make a couple of assumptions. They assume that I was only interested in immigration during the current administration, but I actually started during the Obama administration advocating for immigration reform. And we almost had comprehensive immigration reform during those years. Both Republicans and Democrats were really close to signing a bill. It fell apart at the last minute, and then it became polarized more recently. So it has been, on the advocacy side, it's become just much, much harder to see any sort of change in terms of both attitudes in society, but certainly it's a very hot topic for any legislators to try to touch. So that's become much, much harder over the course of the years. But on the in the legal office as well, things have gotten much harder for immigrants in the last several years. So you may have heard about the recent travel ban expansion in the news, and we have 8 clients from who are Burmese who are affected by that new travel ban, meaning that they have taken action to come to the United States and won't be able to now. We had one client who miraculously, within 2 days of that ban taking effect, was able to get her visa and will be able to join her family in the United States. So I'm very thankful for that. But all of these decisions that are being made, that are being talked about in the news now, are affecting real people that are our neighbors here in West Michigan, and their family members who are abroad. So recently, those sorts of the travel ban, the way that we treat asylees is asylum seekers has changed radically. So it used to be that, I mean, asylum seeking is a legal process, and you can only seek asylum in the United States. You can't do it from your home country. So the fact that we are not allowing people to cross the border to seek asylum, that we're detaining them in Mexico, and then if they are crossing the border, we're incarcerating them rather than releasing them to connect with family members or legal aid, has been particularly problematic. So, and beyond all of the policies that you hear about, there's just been a radical attitude shift with all of the immigration offices, so that things just are slower. There is often a lot of latitude given to immigration officers in terms of processing paperwork, and we have a lot more cases denied, not because we're doing shoddy work, because we do awesome work, but because there's just someone is having a bad day, and they decide to fall on this side of the law rather than the other. So all of the offices, both in Grand Rapids and in our legal offices that are around the country, they're all experiencing just a lot slower dragging of feet in terms of processing paperwork. So the types of things that you talked about with your family's experience are things that we see all the time in our office. So children are translating for their parents. And then just the attitude of the country has made it very, very difficult for immigrants currently.
And so this question is for all of you. What kinds of, and Alex, you kind of touched on this, but what kinds of common misconceptions do you guys see towards immigrants, and what do you wish folks understood better?
Straight from my Thanksgiving table with family members. But there's all these common misperceptions around immigrants. So you hear things like they're taking our jobs. Scott alluded to that. They're here to take our jobs. Well, immigrants start more small businesses by percentage than citizens of the United States. So it's just not true, and they're often doing work that would otherwise be undone if they were not doing that work. They're a draw on our economic system. That is a huge misperception right now. Immigrants end up being a net gain for our economy over the course of time. So initially there's a little bit of, they're just getting their feet underneath them, but over the course of years, and I forget the statistic, but it's something like 5 years, it's not like decades. Over the course of years, they end up being a net gain for our economy. Goodness, what are some of the things that you hear talked about regarding immigrants in the U.S.? Things that family members or friends or things you'd hear on the news. What's that? They're criminals. Oh yeah, they're criminals. So immigrants commit crimes at a lower rate than citizens of the United States. So we are safer. They're diluting the crime-producing population in the United States by coming, right? Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Sorry. So we're in the same government class, and one of our assignments was to debunk these like 5 myths about immigrants and everything. And I think the one I did was that they don't, that they drain the economic system through, that they're an economic burden, and that they don't pay taxes, which we ended up, I mean, did research on it, even though kind of already knew that they actually contribute to taxes and Social Security without getting any of the benefits of it after they retire. Do you remember any other ones? One was, I feel bad even saying the myth, but it's that they're going to like rape our women and things like that, which I think is just absolutely violent and horrible. So that was one of the ones that we had.
Well, that's just part of the narrative around immigrants that has been frustrating, especially the way that news cycles treat any crime that an immigrant does They'll give a lot of airtime to that, make sure that everyone knows that this is an immigrant who has committed this crime, and this crime would be tragic if a citizen of the United States committed it. But because it's an immigrant who's committed this crime, then it's, I don't know, doubly tragic. But statistically, they commit fewer crimes than citizens.
So first of all, I just want to give some credit to a colleague of ours here at Grand Valley, Adriana Almanza, who in light of, this is kind of during the 2016 campaign cycle, in light of some of, I think the more, well, there are a number of really disturbing comments that were made during that campaign, but there was one point at which then candidate Trump talked about how Mexico was sending us the worst, and referred to rapists and criminals, et cetera. And I just want to give some props to our very own Adriana Almanza, who wrote him a public letter and basically used the story of her father as an immigrant to this country who worked every day of his life and did so in order to give her opportunities, and just did so in a way that was really powerful and eloquent, and actually ended up going viral, like globally. So there are those amongst us, even in this community, who are speaking truth to against those stereotypes. One thing I'm curious about, and this is a question both for the panelists but also for the rest of you, I want to acknowledge that immigration takes many forms. So, we've got families who come and individuals who come through a legal immigration process. We have folks who do come as undocumented immigrants over the border. We have young people, here on campus and in our communities who were brought here as children and who are now DACA, who have DACA status. We have folks who come to this country as refugees as a result of war in their home countries. So I think that those are all really different experiences. And I just want to open it up to say, we've heard some really interesting perspective from you, Alex, as the daughter of immigrants who've come from Eastern Europe. I wonder, either Adam, in the work that you've done with the Immigrant Connection, or if others in the room have their own experiences, either with clients who they may serve or family members or their own personal experience, with kind of those different forms of immigration and the different kinds of challenges that face folks depending on kind of how they've come here. And the last thing I want to say, sorry, now I'm apologizing. I just want to acknowledge the way that the American dream is such a motivator for immigrants to come here. I think about, your story, Alex, about how, your family was rooted where they were and had community and language and, a lot to leave behind. I think we often, we don't recognize that people leave their home countries typically not because they want a new adventure, but because they have to, either to flee persecution or economic instability, and the fact that as a country that we hold a lot of responsibility historically for creating economic conditions and military conditions that cause people to flee and seek this, quote, American dream in this country. So I just wanted to raise those different kind of experiences that folks may have depending on why they've come here, and if there's anyone who might share some stories about their experience with refugees or folks who have DACA, et cetera.
So my name's Megan. I work at Treetops Collective. So we're a nonprofit in Grand Rapids. We're right neighbors, right next on Division. And I've only worked with them for about 6 months now, so I'm still pretty new. But we work with women and teens who are new Americans but came with a refugee status. So just kind of, hearing you talk, and I think, there are so many different ways that people immigrate to this country. But coming here and just trying to make a home here, I just, like how we were talking about this American dream and what that means and stuff, but I think how polarized it can be, the stories that I've heard and just that they're living amongst us and they're our neighbors, and we've seen them and we're interacting with them, but we just have no idea the hardships that they're facing just to like feel a sense of belonging. And I think there's so much isolation that, especially in this, the current climate of our country in different ways, but like the othering that was talked about and all those things like that. But it's been, for me, just personally, like to work so firsthand with refugees, and despite language barriers and cultural differences, is like the common humanity is so cool, and that's something that I think if we as a country and as citizens in our community in West Michigan can just highlight, that's just something that's really been imprinted in my heart, is like however people came to this country, whether it was me, my family back generations ago, or the visa lottery or refugee neighbors or whatever, it's like our deeply rooted common humanity is just like the biggest thing. And if we can keep that at the forefront, I just think it can. I'm learning this and seeing this through my neighbors and my coworkers, just like how that can change our community and how it's so important that we can be like leaders in that, and celebrate that. So yeah, I don't know, it's kind of thoughts are running, but I think it's cool, to experience people coming to our country from all these different ways, and how that adds to it, and how that diversity is like our greatest strength, and we should celebrate that diversity and that difference. Acknowledging that deeply rooted common humanity is in all of us, and if we can see that first, we can create and let this be a place that is home for people who are new here, new Americans, old Americans, whatever, but to be a place of belonging for everyone. Yeah, it's cool. So there's cool work happening in Grand Rapids to make that happen, but we can do better, all of us, me too.
I love what you said, and so I don't know if this really answers Melissa's question, but it just has me thinking especially the video that Mr. Stabler played about I think it was the kind of mockumentary about, what was it, A Day Without Mexican, yeah. So our landlord employs a Mexican man and his son to like fix the things that break in our apartment. And when he was introducing us, he said, if he says he's gonna be here at 11, he'll probably be here at noon because he's on Mexican time. And that grinded my gears first, because that seemed like a stereotype, even though he just kind of laughed it off. And so the first time he came there, it was really frustrating with the language barrier and everything, because we realized that he really didn't speak much English. So we asked the landlord to come and like help and explain and everything. And then the landlord like started talking to him in this really slow voice, how some people talk to deaf people when they don't realize how to talk to deaf people and people who don't speak English. So that was strict too. So now before he comes over, I leave a note in English, and then I translate it just on Google Translate into Spanish, hopefully to help. And I feel like that really helps. So I guess my point in that story is that it's so important for us to be allies and be active Americans who are welcoming people and recognize the struggles that they're facing. And much like how Alex shared, the hurdles that your family had to jump over and are still jumping over 20 years later now, so I just think that should be recognized as really important for Americans to make that effort.
So kind of an answer I have to this question. So last year, through Alternative Breaks, I was able to volunteer down in Texas just for a week at the Refugee Services of Texas down in Fort Worth. And there I got to meet so many, it's a nonprofit organization in the area, and there's a few different locations just throughout Texas. And there, like, we got to learn so much about these families, and like they also did kind of like a session with us, like myths and facts, and like they were really upfront, and they're like, oh, all right, we're in Texas, really close to the border, right? And they're like, how many of the families we service do you think are from Mexico? And I don't remember exactly, but it was a very small percentage. And they also explained like how the political climate has everything to do with how these families are treated, how they're viewed by their neighbors, and just beyond that. So, and an interesting fact about this organization in general was a lot of the employees there were families that used the service like even less than 5 years ago. So it was really cool to get to interact with all these different people from different backgrounds, and they were so welcoming and so ready to like teach us and just like inform us better. And then I guess like a little something I'd use to like sum it up in general, and this goes like beyond immigration, beyond anything, and it kind of touches on what you mentioned. So you see someone at their face, but you never know truly what someone's going through, even if they share with you and you think you know everything about them. They'll only let you know what they want you to know. So with that, just no matter what the circumstances, just give everyone grace. And I always like go into like difficult situations or come out of difficult conversations thinking that, because it's easy to work myself up or for anyone to get worked up. But just like remembering that like you don't know what happened to that person that day, 10 years ago, what they're facing. And again, that goes beyond immigration, race, ethnicity, any of that. So I think that's just like something really important to keep in mind, and that comes back to your idea of like humanity in general. That's one thing we can all bank on having in common.
Does anyone else want to add any more experiences with the various forms that immigration takes? Yeah, go ahead.
So this kind of answers Melissa's question, and then also how we were talking about like the misconceptions. My most recent mission, I went to Haiti, and I worked at an orphanage for a week. And there I got to make a lot of connections with a lot of the Haitians that were within the orphanage and people in the community. And there's one really big misconception that we didn't really touch on, is that, well, why don't they just come here legally? And one thing that it's like, before I even went to Haiti, it's so difficult for people to be able to quote unquote come here legally. There's so many students that I talked to when I was in Haiti that said, I want to come to America to receive an education and come back and help my community. But student after student, their visas were getting rejected. So I think that's just one thing that like I keep in the back of my mind too, especially with like the political atmosphere and everything going on and the misconceptions, is that there's a lot more to it, and it's not just easy 1, 2, 3 done. It's a lot harder than people may think for people to be able to come here legally.
be at home. Like, both my parents visit Romania regularly. They both have family there, and I visit as often as I can. I'm actually going to go see my grandma for the first time in 2 years next week, so I'm really excited. But like, just like reflecting on like, and then growing up, I always enjoyed being in Romania because there was this sense of freedom. Like, I could leave home in the morning and not come home until it was after dark. And of course, like, this was before like every kid was carrying a cell phone, and my parents didn't have to worry because they know that I'm with my dad's old high school's friend's kid. So there was just this sense of freedom. And then kind of to apply it to like my life today and like what keeps me motivated is my parents kind of gave up their sense of freedom and independence, because back at home, back in Romania, my dad was such a go-getter, but now he depends so much on my mom because she speaks better English than he does. So just even beyond that, like, I do have like a lot of internal motivation, and just like talking about like what my experience is, which is also very different from my neighbor's experience or their neighbor's experience, because I can also recognize that I have a lot of privilege even being a white female in America who's straight and cisgender. So every person's experience is different, and realizing that I have it better than some other people have it, and just like aspiring to do more because of that. Like, as I mentioned, both my parents have like a lot of technical training in Romania, but neither of them went to college. So they've also just wanted better for me. So they've also been motivating me like ever since I was really little. So if I had to sum it up, just like, and again, like as Scott mentioned, like growing up, all I ever wanted was a 6-figure paycheck. Just like going into college, like I want to be a doctor, I want to be a nurse, and I'm a junior, finishing up my 3rd year this year, hopefully graduating next year, but not gonna sweat it if I don't. I've come to realize that like money isn't what I want to chase, and I realized that before college, and now like since I've changed my major at the beginning of this year, I'm a lot happier because I get to hopefully make an impact on other people's lives. So I hope to either work in local government or in higher ed to have an impact on students when they're where I am now, because I know there are a lot of people who have impacted me as a student, and I'd like to have the same impact. So just like keeping those things in the forefront of what I do, and even if I have hard days, like I know I can like pull through, because like so many more people pulled through, and like no one came here and it was easy for them. Even if it's after generations, like even though some people try to rewrite history or try to skip over a few years just so it can sound nice in the classroom, like it happened. It was in the past, so we have to find the most efficient way and the most respectful way to move forward. So that's kind of what keeps me going.
I think eventually you start to bump up against is the American dream a good motivator for engagement in the American project? So you've heard even today, there are things that we say about America, or that we grow up hearing from teachers about America, that we're a very special nation. We're different. We're exceptional. We are a melting pot or a salad bowl, or pick your metaphor. We're a place where we extend a generous welcome to people of all sorts. So you hear those sorts of things, but then you have policies or political rhetoric sometimes that will be really xenophobic and will scapegoat immigrants or treat them harshly. So I think that part of what makes a community great is when people bring their own values from their own ethical tradition and whatever is driving immigrants to come in the first place. Maybe it is often, sometimes for personal safety, but oftentimes to make a better life for their children or for their community. I think that those sort of human values really inform what could be the American dream. I think we heard this. This is maybe a good connection to the poem that we read earlier. The American dream has, according to Langston Hughes, has always been sort of out there, never achieved, certainly not experienced by him. But in the poem, he kind of alludes to maybe someday, maybe if all of us from a variety of different backgrounds contribute human values to our community, maybe someday we'll experience something that is good and special and incredibly generous in its welcome. So, yeah, I don't know if I would put it out there as a carrot for immigrants. Achieve the American dream. I might say, come be a good human and bring the values that you already hold to the table and share those with others.
All right. Well, with that, everybody join me in giving a round of applause to our wonderful panelists and our presenter tonight. Yeah, you guys are awesome. Thank you all for being here. We've got about 10-ish minutes left, so if there are any questions or any stories or any kind of thing that anybody else would like to share, we can open it up to that now.
So just curious about advocacy and activism work that's going on currently, both in response to local challenges. I know that there's been organizing going on around a driver's license for all here in the city of Grand Rapids, but also in the state of Michigan. I know that there's been a lot of work being done to draw attention to children who are being detained and separated from their parents, detained at the border. I know that DACA remains unresolved, and so there are millions of young people who don't know whether or not they'll be able to stay in this country and build a life for themselves. So I'm curious about, and Adam, this is directed to you, knowing that you've been involved in a lot of that advocacy work. What do you know about in terms of campaigns that are going on and how people who care about particularly undocumented immigrants in our community, as well as those who are seeking asylum at the border and DACA, young people who hold DACA, what kind of work is being done locally to advocate for and support those groups of folks? Pass the mic.
So around those issues that you mentioned, I personally find it helpful I cannot stay on top of the news cycle. I like yourselves, am a busy person. I cannot stay on top. I can't decipher all of the policy that comes through and read every bill that's coming through the state or national legislature. So I've found it helpful to get on a few email lists. So there are organizations that will kick out, this is what's hot right now. This is what's going through legislature. Call your representative. And when you when you find a trusted source, then it makes that process of calling up a representative or making an appointment to go to their office a lot easier. So for me, that would be like the Office of Social Justice at the Christian Reformed Church, or there's a secular one that's eluding me. Pardon? Yeah, Justice for Our Neighbors is a United Methodist group. Michigan Immigrant Rights Center puts stuff out. So it's helpful to me to use my privilege in that way. For me, I divide my engagement in a couple different ways. So if I'm acting as a citizen, I can use my privilege to connect with a representative and say, I live in this place, you're my representative, let me influence you on this particular policy. As a person, I think that just connecting with friends and family members and having involved conversations around immigration is helpful just to soften the general society's view of immigrants. In terms of some of the more dramatic demonstration stuff that I've been part of, like marches or other demonstrations, I have learned that it is helpful to actually follow the lead of immigrants and not be the one in charge. So I'm used to being in charge. I'm in charge in the church that I'm part of, and I find myself in leadership a lot. But to follow the lead of immigrants who are doing this work has been dignifying, and I don't like the word empowering, but it doesn't assume too much on my end. So there's a group called COSECHA here in Grand Rapids that does a lot of work around advocacy, and it has been helpful to follow their lead and then play the role that they want me to play rather than the role that I would choose for myself. So sometimes that is not as glamorous as I want it to be, but I think it is the more effective way of engaging.
Are there any other questions? Okay, awesome. Well, thank you again to you all for being here tonight. The last thing I'll tell you all is that there are evals on your table. If you haven't filled one of those out, please do before you get going. And that these events, as I said before we got started tonight, are held every Wednesday. So if you want more discussions like this, we hope that you join us again. All right, thank you guys. Have a nice night.